You've probably heard it a million times, right? Oh, iPhones don't have a file system. It's all part of that simple, clean image Apple loves to project. But what if I told you that's just a really, really well-crafted illusion? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the iPhone's biggest secrets, the full-blown file system it's been hiding from you this whole time.
It's a super common question. You save a photo, you write a note, you download a PDF, but where does it actually go? Unlike your laptop, there's no Downloads folder or My Documents just sitting there. And that's not an accident or an oversight. It's totally by design.
The story of the iPhone's missing file system really starts with a very specific, very intentional philosophy. This wasn't some technical limitation they couldn't overcome. It was a conscious choice made at the highest levels of Apple way before the first iPhone ever saw the light of day. Now, check out the date on this quote, 2005. That's 2 full years before the iPhone was even announced. Steve Jobs was convinced that the file manager, dragging folders and files around, was the single biggest thing that made computers feel complicated and intimidating. He was determined to build something totally different, to move the whole experience away from managing files and just let people use their apps. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. On a Mac or a PC, everything revolves around the file manager. You find a file, then you open it with an app. But on the original iPhone, that whole idea was just gone. You started in an app, and you stayed in that app. It was a massive shift from a file-centric world to a totally app-centric one.
And this wasn't just some quick experiment either. Apple stuck to its guns with this no files for you philosophy for a solid decade. It took 10 years before the cracks started to show, and they were forced to change course. We'll get to why in a little bit. First, let's take a look at what they were hiding from us all that time. Okay, so if that simple grid of apps on your home screen isn't the whole picture, then what is? It's time to peel back that friendly user interface and see the powerful, complex machine that's actually running things underneath. So this is the view we all know, that clean, simple, and honestly pretty intuitive grid of icons. Everything's neat, it's tidy, and it's all contained in these perfect little squares. It's designed to feel friendly, not scary at all. But lurking just beneath that simple grid is this, a complex hierarchical file system, just like the one on your Mac or a Linux computer. It's all there, directories, system binaries, config files, the whole shebang. That simplicity you see on top, it's just a very, very convincing mask. Now, if this looks kind of familiar to some of you, there's a good reason for that. iOS is a direct descendant of Unix. I mean, its family tree goes from macOS back to an OS called Darwin and all the way back from there. That's why you see these classic standard directories like /bin for binaries and /etc for configuration files. This thing is a proper, powerful operating system. And this whole structure isn't just random either. It actually follows a set of rules called the File System Hierarchy Standard, or FHS. It's basically a blueprint that tells Unix-like systems how to organize their main directories so everything is logical and predictable. So, the big question is, if this complicated file system is really there, how in the world does Apple do such an amazing job of hiding it? Well, this is where the really clever software engineering kicks in. It's all about creating layers of abstraction. It really boils down to 2 main tricks that Apple uses to create this seamless no-files experience. These 2 illusions work together to completely hide the complexity that's chugging away underneath. Okay, so trick number 1 is something called the shared cache. See, on a normal operating system, code is stored in lots of separate little library files. But on iOS, to make things faster, Apple basically rips all that code out and smashes it together into one gigantic, optimized mega file. Not only does this speed things up, but it also makes it a total nightmare for anyone trying to figure out how iOS works, which is a pretty effective way to hide the system's gut. And now for the second and, honestly, the more important trick. iOS is obsessed with SQLite databases. Yeah, you heard that right. Simple little databases. Instead of making an app juggle thousands of individual files, Apple just gives each app its own private database to store everything in. So get this. What you think of as a file is very often just a single entry, a single row in a database table. Let's walk through a real-world example. You open up the Notes app, you type something brilliant, and you hit save. What happens? The app does not create a .txt file anywhere.
Nope, it just adds a new row to its own internal database, probably called something like notestore.sql. Your note is now a secure database record, completely sandboxed or walled off, and totally invisible to every other app on your phone. This table really puts it all into perspective. On a PC, saving a photo means making a .jpeg file and putting it in a folder. On iOS, that photo just gets absorbed into the Photos app's giant database. Writing a document in Pages? Well, that just becomes a new record in the Pages database. It's this database-first approach that makes the whole illusion work. But as we all know, this perfect fileless world couldn't last forever. After a decade of holding the line, Apple finally had to bend its own rules and bring back the very thing it had tried so hard to kill. 10 years, let that sink in. For a full decade, that original no files philosophy was the absolute law of the land on iOS. It just goes to show how deeply committed Apple was to this vision. But eventually, the real world, especially for pro users, started to poke some serious holes in the concept. The real tipping point was the iPad Pro. Apple started marketing this thing as a real-deal laptop replacement. But, how can you replace a PC if you can't even move a simple file from one app to another? Professionals needed to, say, open a PDF from an email into an annotation app or move a video clip into a separate editor. The sandboxed database model just fell apart for those kinds of workflows. So in 2017, Apple finally caved and gave us the Files app. Problem solved, right? We finally got a direct, raw look into the file system. Well, not quite. There's one last twist to this whole story. That's what you'd think, right? A file manager is a file manager. It should give you that direct window into the system we saw earlier. But that would go completely against Apple's obsession with security and sandboxing. They were just going to throw the gates wide open. So they gave us a door, but they kept a whole bunch of locks on it. Instead of giving us the real thing, they built another layer of abstraction. One final illusion. And here it is, the final reveal. The Files app isn't a real file browser at all. It is a brilliant fake-out that uses, you guessed it, its own SQL-like database. It creates a virtual, fake directory that looks and feels totally real. But behind the scenes, it's just a secure lookup table. When you tap on a file, the Files app looks up its real hidden location and then safely connects you to that file, which is still locked away inside its original app. It's genius, really. And all of this brings us to the big philosophical question. For a decade, Apple put simplicity and accessibility above everything else, and it made computers way more intuitive for millions of people. But that came at the cost of power and control for the user. Was hiding all that complexity the right call? It's a really fascinating debate between making things easy versus making them powerful. I really hope this gave you a whole new way to look at that phone in your pocket. For more simple and useful tech insights just like this one, make sure you subscribe to Refreshing Tech. Thanks for watching.